I am Dana Pierce. I am 34 years old. I have been an emergency room nurse for 11 years, and for most of those 11 years, I believed my mother loved me, the way she loved a good story about me, loudly, in front of other people, and only when it made her look like the kind of woman who raises devoted daughters. There is a difference between a mother who cares for you and a mother who performs caring, and for a long time I could not see it, because the performance was very good. She brought soup when I was sick. She posted about me on holidays. She told the aunts I was her rock. The soup was real, the post was real, the rock was a costume. But my mother did not know one thing about the chart. In a hospital, the chart is the only thing that is allowed to be the truth. Not the patient's memory, not the doctor's intention, not the family's version of events. The chart, every entry is time-stamped. Every cosign is logged. Every access leaves a footprint. The terminal, the employee ID, the minute. You cannot quietly change a signed record. You can add an addendum. You can never make the first signature disappear. That is the whole point of a chart, and it is the one rule my mother spent her life breaking in every room that was not a hospital. She thought families worked like the stories she told. I learned over 11 years of emergency medicine that stories are the easiest thing in the world to fake and the hardest thing to audit. A chart audits itself. A family does not. My name is on this story the way my name was supposed to be on those forms. The difference is, this time I got to decide where it went. If you are new here, hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what city you are in and what time it is where you are. I read them, all of them, usually at 3 a.m. between a discharge and the next ambulance. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday in March, 3 years ago, the night my mother called to say she was sorry. Let me take you back to that Tuesday. It was 9:41 p.m. I was on hour 12 of a 14-hour shift at Mercy General, the kind of shift where the waiting room has become a second living room and the fluorescent lights have stopped meaning anything. My phone lit up on the break room table with a name I had not seen in 3 years. Elin or Pierst? My mother. I did not answer. I watched it ring, the way you watch a machine finish a cycle you cannot stop. On the third ring, it went to voicemail. On the fourth, it rang again, which is the part of my mother that tells you everything. She does not accept the first, no, or the second, or the silence. She rings until the silence answers. The voicemail was 9 seconds of her best wounded voice. Dana, sweetheart, I know it's been a while. I want to make things right. Can we have dinner? Just you and me. No drama. I'll explain everything. No drama. My mother had not produced a single event in her life that did not contain drama, and she always announced its absence right before she produced the most of it. I did not call back that night, or the next, or the week after. When the text started, a photo of a casserole I had not eaten, a screenshot of a memory I had not shared, a thinking of you that arrived at 2:14 a.m., which is the hour my mother does her real work, the hour when the people she has burned are asleep and cannot answer. That 2:14 a.m. detail will matter later. Keep it. I had gone no contact with my mother 3 years before that voicemail, and the reason was not dramatic. It was a number, $41,000. That was the balance on a credit line I had not opened in my name with my date of birth, that my mother had somehow caused to exist during the 2 years I was working nights, and trusting her to handle the family paperwork after my grandmother died. When I found it, she said the same thing she said about everything. It's just a form, Dana. I signed it for you. It's fine. It was not fine. It took me 19 months and a second job to clear, and it taught me the first rule I would need. My mother's definition of fine was undetected by you so far. That is the woman who left the voicemail. That is the woman who wanted dinner. That is the woman I almost did not see again. And the only reason I said yes was a sentence from my charge nurse, Mona, who had been a nurse longer than I had been alive. She said, "Go. Either you close it or you feed it. Sitting in the hallway with it is the only option that kills you." Mona is the kind of nurse who tells the truth in short sentences, and I have never once seen her wrong. So I said yes to dinner. I told myself I was going to close it. I did not know yet that my mother had already opened something else in my name, and that dinner was not a reconciliation. It was a recruitment. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner, you need to understand the house I came from, because the house is the chart, and the chart is the only honest thing in this story. My mother, Eleanor, was the eldest of four, and the only one who turned survival into a personality. Her sisters were competent in the quiet way of women who do the work. Eleanor was competent in the loud way of women who describe the work to an audience. She married my father Greg when she was 22 and he was 24, and by the time I was old enough to notice, the marriage had become a duet in which she sang and he mouthed the words. He was a mechanic. He was kind. He is the reason I believe some men simply disappear into the background of a louder woman and call it peace. I have a brother, Caleb. Caleb is 2 years older. Caleb is the one the family calls the easy one, which is the family's code for the one who learned early not to have opinions my mother could not use. Caleb left for the army at 18, came back quieter, got a job loading trucks, and sends a card every Mother's Day that says exactly what a card is supposed to say. Caleb is not in this story as a villain. He is in it as a warning. He is what a person looks like after 30 years of signing forms he did not read. I was the other kind of daughter, the kind who read the form. The kind who at 9 years old asked why the permission slip for the field trip had a second signature line that said Guardian. The kind who at 14 noticed my mother had opened a college savings account in my name and was the only signer on it. The kind who at 23 became a nurse and learned that the most powerful sentence in any room is "Let me see the record." My mother loved Caleb's silence and resented my questions. She called my questions Dana being Dana, the way you call a storm weather, as if noticing it were the problem. She did not hate me. Hatred would have been honest. She experienced my competence as a theft. I was taking away the one thing she needed, which was a daughter who did not check. Eleanor's own mother, my grandmother, was the original performer, and the apple did not fall, it was placed. Grandma Pierce ran the ladies' auxiliary at the church and the gossip at the same table, a woman who could make a casserole and a character assassination in one afternoon and serve both with a smile. My mother learned the craft at her knee: how to be the most devoted daughter in the room while owing 3 creditors, how to be the most generous sister while lending nothing, how to make a man feel chosen while arranging his exit. When Grandma died, the family paperwork my mother volunteered to handle turned out to include a life insurance policy with a beneficiary line that had been corrected, in my mother's hand, to read Elinor Piersuriware, where my aunt swore it had read the 3 sisters equally. Barbara caught it. Barbara always caught it. The aunts split it anyway, because by then they were too tired to fight, and my mother kept the extra share the way she kept everything, by performing gratitude so well that resentment looked like envy in anyone who asked. I was 19 when Barbara told me. I was 23 when I became a nurse and understood my mother did not steal from her sisters. She authored a document in which she was the heroine, and the stealing was just the footnote. That is the family I came from. That is the chart I had to audit. The house smelled of 2 things my whole childhood: white diamond perfume and burned popcorn. The perfume was for company. The popcorn was for us. She wore the perfume to PTA, to church, to the door when the aunts visited, and she took it off the moment they left, the way you unbutton a costume. The burned popcorn was the real meal, eaten standing up in the kitchen while she told Caleb and me the story of the day she had just performed for other people. I can still smell both. The perfume is in every hospital gift shop I have ever walked past. The popcorn is in every break room at 3 a.m. My aunts knew. The 3 sisters, Barbara, Ruth, and the youngest, Joan, watched Eleanor perform for 40 years and said nothing, because saying something would have ended the show and none of them wanted to be the one who turned off the lights. Barbara was the practical one, the one who actually helped when help was needed. Ruth was the gentle one, who sent cards. Joan was the funny one who made jokes that were really warnings. They loved my mother. They also pitied anyone who married her script. When I was 19 and the credit line first appeared, Barbara pulled me aside at a funeral. We always talked at funerals, the only place Eleanor went quiet, and said, "Watch the papers, Dana. She loves you, but she loves the story more, and the story always costs someone." Barbara was the only adult in my childhood who treated a form like a fact. I did not understand her then. I understand her now, standing in an ER where every form is a fact and every fact has a cost. My father, Greg, deserves his own sentence, because the quiet ones do. He was a mechanic at a shop on Mill Road, hands always gray with grease even on Sundays, a man who fixed other people's engines and could not fix the one at home. He did not enable my mother so much as he absented himself from her. He went to the garage, he came back, he ate the burned popcorn, he mouthed the words. When I was 12, I asked him why Mom signed for me on the savings account, and he said, "She handles the papers, Dan. That's just how it is." That sentence, "That's just how it is the soundtrack of a childhood spent watching a parent choose comfort over protection. Greg died when I was 21, of a heart that simply stopped, the way a machine runs out of something it needed and no one noticed in time. I was at the hospital when it happened. I was the one who spelled his name for the chart. The chart got his name right. My mother got the eulogy, which was, of course, very good and very much about her. Here is the thing about a performer: they cannot help performing the grief either. At the funeral, she was luminous, the bereaved wife who had lost her rock, and the aunts wept and the cousins said she was so strong. And I stood in the back smelling the white diamond over the lilies and thought, she is not grieving Greg, she is directing the grief. Greg, who had spent 30 years disappearing so she could appear, disappeared one final time into a story that was not his. I have never told anyone that. I tell you now because it is the root. My mother did not lose people. She absorbed them into the role she had written, and the role was always devoted, and the devotion was always a costume, and the costume always needed someone to pay for the wardrobe. The birthdays were the purest performance. Every year, a stack of pancakes shaped like a heart, a candle, a photo, and a story told to the table about how my Dana had been such a help with whatever the current crisis was. The pancakes were real, the help was invented. I was, at those birthdays, a character my mother narrated, the devoted daughter who helped with the bills, who stayed close. Who stayed close? What housemansters was? Who understood? I was the one who had stopped asking. The aunts nodded. Caleb smiled. My father ate. And I, even at 9, even at 14, even at 19, felt the gap between the Dana at the table and the Dana in the story, and learned early that the gap was mine to carry, because naming it would end the show, and ending the show was in our family the unforgivable sin. You could be used, you could not be uncast. I broke that rule at 26, when I read the credit line and stopped performing devotion. The show went on without me. It always does. The only difference was that, this time, I kept the paper. Money in that house was a story my mother told, never a number she showed. The mortgage was fine, the cards were managed, the bills were under control. I learned as a nurse that stable is a word you earn by measuring, not by hoping, and our finances were the opposite of stable, they were narrated. There is a word for a patient who describes a condition they will not let you examine. We call it non-compliant. My mother was financially non-compliant, and the people who loved her were the ones who got examined instead. She balanced the family budget the way she balanced a casserole. By appearance. The bills were paid when they were paid and hidden when they were not, and hidden in our house meant mentioned as if resolved. A late notice became, they fixed that. A collection call became, a misunderstanding. A second mortgage she took without telling my father became, just something for the girls' college, which is the line she used on the credit line she opened in my name too. The word college was her universal justification, the way routine was her universal verb for a form. If a form touched a daughter's future, it was for college. If a form touched a daughter's name, it was routine. The costume was always education or paperwork. The crime was always the same. A signature obtained by a story the signer was not allowed to read. The mortgage was fine. The cards were managed. The bills were under control. I learned as a nurse that stable is a word you earn by measuring, not by hoping, and our finances were the opposite of stable. They were narrated. There is a word for a patient who describes a condition they will not let you examine. We call it non-compliant. My mother was financially non-compliant, and the people who loved her were the ones who got examined instead. Here is a number that is real. When I was 26, I co-signed a car loan for her because she said the transmission had died and she could not get to work. The transmission had not died. She traded the car in 6 months later for a newer one and told me the loan worked itself out. It did not work itself out. I paid $4,180 of it before it closed. Money I did not have, taken from shifts I worked while my own transmission, my own life, was sputtering. I have the statements. I kept every statement, because by then I had learned the second rule. In a family like mine, the paper is the only witness who does not flinch. The second job was a staffing agency that sent me to nursing homes on my days off, 12-hour shifts for $23 an hour. The money routed straight to the loan that was not mine. I worked a year and a half of double life, Mercy General by night, a memory care floor by weekend, sleeping in my car some afternoons in the hospital parking garage because the two shifts met in the middle, and there was no apartment between them cheap enough to justify the drive. I tell you this not for pity but for the number. I paid $4,180 I did not owe, and I learned the third rule, which is that exhaustion is a weapon used against you by people who are rested. My mother rested. She posted. She narrated. I paid. The asymmetry is the whole machinery of a family like mine. The one who documents is the one who is drained, and the one who performs is the one who is fed. Caleb signed. Of course, Caleb signed. Not the credit line. I never found his name on that. But 100 smaller things, the way a man signs a birthday card he did not pick out. The lease my mother helped him with, the tax form she filled in, the power of attorney she held just in case, after he came back from the army quieter than he left. Caleb does not read forms. Caleb is what you get when you are taught, from infancy, that reading a form is a betrayal of the family's peace. He is not weak, he is trained. My mother trained both of us, me to read and resist, him to sign and forget, and she loved him more for it, because a son who forgets is a son who cannot contradict her. I sometimes wonder which of the 16 forged forms began as a form Caleb was handed first. A form he slid back unsigned because even he knew this one was too far. A form that then came to me in a different envelope. I will never know. Some specimens you leave in the jar. That habit, keep the paper, is the reason I am alive to tell you this. Let me give you the profession plainly, because the profession is the plot. I am an ER nurse. I work triage, resus, the tracked beds, the hallway. I have started IVs on people who were laughing and coded before the line flushed. I have held phones to the ears of the dying so a voice on the other end could say goodbye. I have watched families invent forgiveness in the last 10 minutes of a life and call it love. The emergency room teaches you one thing above all others. In a crisis, the person who stays calm is the person who has seen the chart. A chart in my world is not a file, it is a chain of custody. Every medication has a time and a witness. Every consent has a signature and a capacity note. Every change is an addendum, never an erasure. If a nurse alters a signed record, that is not a mistake, that is a firing, and often a charge. The chart is sacred because it is the only thing in medicine that is not allowed to lie, and the lie is caught by the log, not by the supervisor. The log sees everything. The log never sleeps. The log does not love you and does not need you to love it back. I want to give you a scene from the ER, because it is the scene my mother should have pictured and did not. 2 years into my career, a Wednesday, a man in his 70s came in with chest pain, and his daughter, maybe 40, maybe frantic, maybe both, arrived after we had stabilized him and said, "He wouldn't want this. Take him off everything," he told me. There was a DNR on file, signed, dated, witnessed by a nurse who was not me. The daughter said, "That's not his signature, that's mine. I signed for him, he was too weak." She had signed her father's DNR. She had decided, in a quiet room, to end her father's care with a pen, because the pen was easier than the conversation. We did not follow it. A signature made by the wrong hand is not a consent. It is a forgery wearing a costume, and in medicine we are trained to see the hand before we honor the mark. I pulled the record. The witness nurse confirmed the patient had been alert and signing. The daughter's name came off the chart the way a wrong medication comes off an order, immediately with a note. That night I went home and thought about my mother for the first time as a pattern and not a person. She had been signing for other people her whole life. For me, for Caleb, for my father's paperwork, for the family forms, and every one of those signatures was a small DNR on someone else's life. A quiet decision made with a pen because the pen was easier than the truth. The emergency room is a church of paperwork. People come in bleeding and we ask for an insurance card. People come in dying and we ask who is authorized. The cruelty is only apparent. The mercy is real. The forms are what let us help you without guessing, and guessing is how people die. So I learned to respect the form the way a priest respects the rite, not because the paper is holy, but because the paper is what stops the wrong hand from deciding for the right one. My mother saw forms as suggestions. I saw them as sacraments. We were always going to collide, and the collision would be recorded. Patients teach you about families faster than families teach you about themselves. I have watched a son refuse pain medication to his dying mother because the morphine was for addicts, and sign the refusal with a hand that shook, not from grief but from the need to be right. I have watched a wife authorize a surgery the husband had begged to avoid, because the wife had already planned the recovery she wanted to narrate. I have watched a father sign a "do not resuscitate" on a daughter who, 10 minutes later, opened her eyes and said she wanted to live. Every one of those signatures was a story someone told about someone else, and every one of them in my got checked against the person it claimed to speak for. Consent is not a form. Consent is a voice. And if the voice is not in the room, the form is a theft. My mother's whole life was forms without voices. She signed for the silent, for my father, for the family, for me while I slept, and called it love, the way the son called the morphine for addicts, and the wife called the surgery care. The costume changes. The hand does not. I have a patient now sometimes who reminds me of her, a woman who directs her own care from the waiting room, who tells the triage nurse what the diagnosis is before we have run a test, who signs the consent with a flourish and a smile and a story about how brave she is being. I am gentle with her. I have to be. She is my mother's twin in a gown, and the only difference between them is that the one in my will be caught by the chart, and the one in my childhood was caught by a daughter who took 11 years to learn the same rule. I chart her carefully. I note the flourish. I do not argue. I let the record do what families never could, speak after the performance ends. Mona taught me the second half of that lesson. Mona Reyes, my charge nurse, the woman who has worked the floor at Mercy General longer than I have been alive. She came up through the Bronx in the 80s, when the ran on paper charts and muscle, and she carries that era in her hands. She can read a patient the way I read a form, by the shape of the body under the sheet. She trained me on my first day and has never once told me I was ready. She told me instead, "You will be ready when you stop trying to be." I have worked under her for 9 years. We have never discussed my mother. I once said the word family in her presence, and she looked at me the way a triage nurse looks at a chest pain. That is not a chest pain, like it might be something else, and the something else was none of her business until I brought it through the door. I am bringing it through the door now. She will never know. There is a scene I keep from her, because Mona keeps scenes the way an archivist keeps folders. A December night, a code on a man in his 50s, family in the corridor, wife, 2 sons, a daughter who arrived after we had been working 20 minutes. The daughter said, "Stop, he wouldn't want this," my mother told me. The mother said, "Do not stop." The chart said he had signed a code status discussion 3 weeks earlier, witnessed by his primary. That was a full code. The daughter had nothing. The mother had a paper. The paper won. We worked another 9 minutes. The man lived. The daughter did not speak to the mother for a year, then spoke, then stopped again. I asked Mona on the break after. "How did you know?" Mona said. "I didn't know. I read the chart said full code. I did what the chart said. The chart is older than every daughter in that corridor. I have carried that sentence like a credential. The chart is older than every daughter in that corridor. The chart is older than my mother, and the chart is older than the meal she wanted to buy me with my name." Barbara did her own audit. Once I did not know this until I was 28, and she came to visit me in the city, an unusual event, and she brought a folder. The folder was thin. The folder was the original life insurance claim form from my grandmother's policy, the same one my mother had corrected. Barbara had, before she signed the split, taken the form to a notary and had it notarized as the version on file before any correction. She had done this on the day my mother announced the new beneficiaries, before the aunt signed, before the money moved. The notary cost her $40 and saved her $100,000. She had, in other words, audited my mother with a stamp and a date, and the stamp was still in the folder, and the date was still on the stamp, and the date was the day before. She never told anyone. She let the split happen. She let my mother keep the share. She filed the folder. She waited 15 years. I held that folder and understood, for the first time, what watch the papers really meant. It meant, do the work in advance, quietly, and let the loud family burn themselves on the paper you already sealed. Barbara was the original version of me, and she did it with a notary stamp instead of an EHR. The instrument changes. The patience does not. A month after I cut her off, Caleb called me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, the night shift hour, the only hour he could reach me, because he had learned that evenings were my mother's. He said, "She showed me the credit line, Dana." I didn't know. He said it the way you say a thing you have practiced. I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "She said it was for college." I said, "It was not for college." He said, "I didn't read it." He meant, I didn't read the form. He meant, I signed. The conversation was 11 minutes long, and we did not solve anything. Caleb is the part of this story that is not a victory, and I leave him in it because families are not stories. They are balances, and a balance is not one. It is held. Caleb and I talk now, sometimes, about trucks and weather and his dog. We do not talk about forms. The forms between us are filed in a drawer neither of us opens, and that is, for now, the kindest thing two siblings trained by the same woman can do for each other. The compounding on that $41,000 credit line was the part I want to tell you about, because compounding is what a forger does not understand and what a chart always does. She opened the line in February of the year my grandmother passed. By the time I found it, 14 months later, the balance had grown from 25,000 to 41,000, because the minimum payment she had told me she was making for me had been a lie that compounded at 22%. 22% on a line I had not opened, on a balance I had not known, was the math of a relationship. 22% is what families like mine charge each other for the privilege of not asking. I paid it off in 19 months, working the second job, sleeping in parking garages, eating the food of a person who has stopped cooking because cooking takes a kitchen, and kitchens are where the memory of her mother lives. I paid it off in full. The last payment was on a Tuesday. I remember the date because the receipt had a timestamp of 9:41 p.m., and 9:41 p.m. is the hour my mother would, 3 years later, call to say she was sorry. And the coincidence is the only poetry the chart ever wrote for me. I wear a badge, not a name. The badge has a number, and the number is what the hospital loves. It clocks me in, it logs my access, it timestamps my every entry, and it does not care if I am tired or brave or grieving. On the worst night of my career, a pediatric code that did not turn, I charted the death at 2:14 a.m., the same minute. In a different year, my mother was uploading a form in my name. Somewhere in the system, our two 2:14 a.m.s exist on the same clock, hers a theft and mine a mercy, both recorded, both true, both beyond argument. That is what a log is. It does not judge the act. It only proves the hand. My mother's hand was at her kitchen table. Mine was at a bedside. The chart knows. The chart always knows. And when the two stories met, hers of a devoted daughter who signs, mine of a nurse who was at work, the chart did not hesitate. It sided with the timestamp. My mother never understood this. She thought a signature was a feeling. You sign because you care. I learned a signature is a fact. You sign because you were there, and the log will say if you were. That gap between her belief and my training is the whole distance of this story, and it is the distance she walked straight into. Now, the part you've been waiting for. The dinner. She picked the restaurant. Of course she picked the restaurant. A chain place with soft lighting and a laminated menu and a waitress who called everyone, honey. Eleanor Pierce does not do reconciliation in a kitchen. She does it on a stage with a witness, and the waitress was the witness. She arrived first, already seated, already had a glass of iced tea sweating a ring onto the paper, already performing calm. She stood when I came in, which is the part of her that is genuinely tender and genuinely calculated at once. She always stands, so the room sees the daughter arrive. I sat. She reached across the table and patted my hand, the pat that was both comfort and custody. You look tired, sweetheart. The hospital's eating you alive. The hospital was eating me alive, but she was not the one who got to say it. I've been thinking, she said, and I owe you an apology. For the credit line, for all of it. I was scared after your grandmother died and I made mistakes. Mistakes. The word she used for things that were choices. I want us to start over. Just sign a couple of things for me, routine, and we can put it behind us. A couple of things, routine, put it behind us. The texts in the weeks before dinner were their own kind of chart, and I read them like one. A casserole photo on a Tuesday. Made your favorite, wish you were here. Sent at 2:09 a.m. a screenshot of a memory. My high school graduation captioned, my girl. At 1:58 a.m., a voice memo she forgot I would not open. 40 seconds of her practicing the wounded tone she would use in person. The 2 a.m. hour was her workshop. She built the reconciliation at night and performed it by day, the way a nurse preps a chart before the doctor rounds. I did not answer. I filed them. The timestamps would later match, almost to the minute, the hour she uploaded the forged forms, 2:14 a.m. On the forms, 2:09 and 1:58 on the texts. She was, it turned out, multitasking, loving me and billing me in the same quiet hour, the lure and the theft composed in one sitting. The restaurant smelled of fried cheese and lemon cleaner, the polite version of a hospital break room, artificial warmth over antiseptic. The waitress honey came by twice before we ordered, once to refill the iced tea that kept sweating its ring, once to ask if we were celebrating. My mother said, a reunion, and smiled at me, And the waitress smiled too, because my mother's smiles are contagious and cost nothing to receive. The laminated menu bent at the corner from 1,000 hands. The light was the color of a waiting room at the hour it stops meaning anything. I have stood in that light for 11 years. I recognized it in a chain restaurant on a Tuesday, and I knew the way you know a patient is about to code before the monitor agrees, that the reunion was the event and I was the complication she intended to resolve with a pen. The decision to go had not been made in that restaurant. It had been made 3 weeks earlier in the break room at Mercy General, when I told Mona what the text said, and Mona said, "Go." I said, "Why?" Mona said, "Because you have been carrying her in your hip pocket for 3 years and your hip is tired." I said, "What if she asks me for something?" Mona said, "She will. Say no. You are very good at saying no. You have been saying it in your sleep." I said, "What if she is sorry?" Mona said, "She is not sorry, she is shopping. Sorry is the perfume she puts on before she asks for the car. Go. See the perfume, do not buy the car." I went. I bought no car. I did, as Mona said, smell the perfume. The perfume that night smelled of white diamond and a waitress named Honey, and an envelope that was not on the menu. I dressed for the dinner the way I dress for a code. Clean, calm, no jewelry that could catch on a line. I wore my hair back. I wore the watch my father left me, the one with the scratched face and the second hand that still ticks even when the battery should be dead. I drove because I wanted my car in the parking lot, an exit that belonged to me, not a rideshare that would leave when the meter ran. I parked at the back, under a light that would remember my plate. I went in. I sat. The iced tea sweated. The show began. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were forms. I did not open it at the table. I am not proud, I am trained, and training said, "Do not sign anything in a room where the person asking is also the person who benefits." Inside the envelope were forms, and on top, a single sheet she had flagged with a paper clip and a smiley face drawn in blue ink. My mother draws smiley faces on documents the way other people draw breath, as a default, as if the face could stand in for the content. "Just these," she said, tapping the flagged sheet. "The rest are for later, don't worry about them. Don't worry about them. The rest." She had already decided there would be a rest, a second envelope, a third, a life of envelopes, each one a small theft she would call a favor, and each one requiring the one signature she could not forge well enough to pass a log. "You're my next of kin," she said again, as if kinship were a notary. "It's just paperwork, Dana. You know I'd never ask if it wasn't important." She would never ask if it wasn't important. Importance to her was whatever served the story, and the story tonight was reconciliation, and reconciliation required a signature, and the signature required me, and the me she needed was the soft one who signs, and the me at the table was the one who reads. But I saw the edge of one form, and on it, in a hand that was not mine and not quite hers, was a line that said "Authorized Representative," and under it a signature that looked like it was trying to be Dana Pierce. That detail, the trying, is the whole case. I did not open the envelope. I pushed it back, gently, the way you return a chart that is not yours. "What are these, Mom?" I asked, in the same tone I used to ask a patient what they took. Calm. Specific. Unthreatening enough to keep them talking. "Just medical stuff," she said, and waved a hand, the white diamond wrist turning under the light. "My new doctor wants a family authorization on file. You're my next of kin. It's nothing. Sign, and we eat." Family authorization. Next of kin. Nothing. 3 words, 3 lies, stacked like the pancakes she used to make on birthdays. I had heard those 3 words before, in a different form, about the credit line. It's nothing. Sign, and we eat. The script never changed. Only the envelope did. I said I would look at them at home. She pressed. "Sign now, honey. The waiter can witness." The waiter, she wanted the waitress to witness. That is the moment I knew it was not routine. Because routine does not need an audience and a pen already in hand. I said no, quietly, and the meal continued as if I had agreed to something I had not. That is her gift. She treats your no as a pause in her yes. What she did not know, sitting there in her white diamond and her practiced calm, was that the envelope was already evidence before she opened it. A manila envelope, slid across a table in a chain restaurant with a waitress as the intended witness. That is a scene a nurse recognizes from the other side, the side where someone tries to get a signature witnessed, because the signature will not survive scrutiny alone. Witnesses are for signatures that need help. My mother needed a witness because she knew, somewhere under the performance, that her hand would not pass. The waitress, Honey, would have been the alibi. Instead, she became the reason I said no out loud, on the record, in a room with a witness, because a refusal spoken in front of a third party is the strongest paper there is, and I left that table with the only signature that mattered, hers, nowhere, and mine, absent and documented. She asked 3 more times before the food came. Each ask was softer than the last and more certain of the answer, the way a person repeats a line they have rehearsed past the point of hearing it. Just the one. The waiter can witness. For me, Dana. The words stacked like the pancakes, heart-shaped, candle-lit, hollow. I ate. She ate. The iced tea kept sweating. The waitress refilled it and smiled at both of us. The devoted daughter and the devoted mother, and neither of us corrected her, because correcting her would have ended the show and only one of us was willing to do that. I let her perform. Performance to a nurse is a kind of vitals. You watch it, you note it, you do not interrupt it until you have what you came for. I came for the envelope. I left with the refusal. The show ended on my silence, not hers. She tried, in the last 15 minutes, a different costume. She put her hand over her face and said, very quietly, "Your father would have wanted us to be together." The restaurant had not changed. The iced tea had not changed. The waitress had not changed. My father had not changed. He had been dead for 13 years, and his absence had been so thoroughly edited by my mother that it was sometimes hard to remember she had lost him at all. The sentence was a costume. The costume was grief. Grief, on her, was the last suit she kept in the closet, and she put it on when every other suit had failed. I had seen her wear it at family funerals, at her own hospitalizations, at my graduation. She wore it now, in a chain restaurant, over an iced tea ring, the way a magician pulls a card from a deck you have already seen. I did not flinch. I did not comfort her. I said, Dad would have wanted us to be honest. She lowered her hand. The card had not worked. She picked up the iced tea. The waitress refilled it. The ring widened. The show finally ended. What she did not know, sitting there in her white diamond and her practiced calm, was that I had already seen one of these forms. 2 weeks earlier, a letter had come from a billing department I did not recognize, addressed to me, about a procedure coded 62,287, a percutaneous lumbar procedure, performed at a surgical center I had never been to, billed to my insurance with an authorized representative signature that the letter said was mine. I had not had a lumbar procedure. I had not authorized anything. I had not been to that center. The letter was dated a Thursday. It listed the provider as Cedarbrook Surgical Center, a place 80 miles away that I had last seen only as a name on a denied claim for my father years before. The procedure code 62,287 is, I looked it up, a percutaneous procedure on the spine, something you do not do to a person who has never complained of back pain, has no imaging on file, and was, on the date of the procedure, clocked into Mercy General at 7 p.m. for a shift that ended at 7 a.m. the next morning. The authorized representative signature was the only thing connecting me to it. Without that signature, the claim was a ghost, a procedure with no patient who agreed and no representative who was real. My mother had supplied the ghost. The insurer had paid it because the ghost looked enough like me to pass a cursor and a checkbox. That is the cruelty of automated billing. It does not love you, but it will pay for you if the paper says so, and the paper in her hand said anything she needed. But my insurance had paid $6,400 of it, and the letter was a courtesy copy of a claim that had already been resolved. Dinner was not a reconciliation. Dinner was the second attempt in person to get the signature that had been forged the first time, and was now needed again because the forged one had a problem. My mother had not anticipated it could be checked. Here is what I did next, and here is where the profession becomes the plot. I went home and I did not cry, because crying is what she wanted, a daughter emotional enough to sign to make it stop. I made tea. I opened my laptop. I did the one thing my mother never does and never expected me to do. I pulled the record. The first thing I did was not the audit. The first thing I did was open my phone and photograph the envelope. The smiley face, the flagged sheet, every page, every corner of every page. I photographed the way a nurse photographs a wound, full frame, with a ruler for scale. The smiley face in the photograph stopped looking like affection and started looking like a witness to a crime. I emailed the photos to myself at 3 separate addresses, then to a backup folder I had opened that night under a name my mother could not pronounce. The trail begins before the audit. The trail is the audit spine. I learned that from Barbara, who had, 15 years before me, taken a folder to a notary and not told a soul. The second thing I did was call a friend, not Mona. Mona would have understood. But Mona is hospital, and the hospital is a place where my name is clean, and I did not want to put any of this on the hospital. I called Daniel Kwan, a lawyer I dated briefly in my late 20s, who practices healthcare fraud defense and who owed me, as he put it once, an evening of honest conversation. He picked up on the second ring. I told him the outline, not the names. He said, "Do not call the insurer yet. Call the board first, your license first, then the insurer, then the AG, in that order, and send me everything." He was, by the end of the call, my unpaid counsel, and he told me, "Do not respond to any text from her, do not pick up if she calls. The pattern is the proof, and any new contact will muddy the pattern." I did not pick up, the pattern held. The third thing I did was sit with my tea and not cry. I want to be honest about the not crying. I did not cry because crying is what she wanted, and I did not cry because I had been a nurse long enough to know that tears are not a strategy, and I did not cry because the audit had not yet begun, and I needed the audit to begin clean. But I almost cried once because somewhere in the envelope was a smiley face that meant, "This is love," and the love had been the only shape my childhood ever had. The shape was a forgery. I kept the tea. I let the almost cry pass. I opened the portal. The audit began. My insurance portal has an audit section most people never open. Every claim has a trail: who submitted it, from what provider, on what date, with what national provider identifier, and critically, every time a representative signature is recorded, the system logs the IP address and the timestamp of the upload. My mother had uploaded 16 forms across 11 months from one IP address, her home Wi-Fi, at hours that clustered, without exception, between 1:50 and 2:30 a.m. I am an ER nurse. I work shifts. On every single one of those 16 dates, my own badge log shows me on the floor of Mercy General, clocked in, sometimes mid-resuscitation, always verifiably not at my mother's kitchen table at 2:14 a.m. signing anything. The chart remembered what she forgot, that I was at work. The pattern was so clean it was almost a confession. 16 uploads, 11 months, every one between 1:50 and 2:30 a.m., everyone from the same IP, everyone on a date my badge placed me at Mercy General. 3 of them listed me as responsible party, 2 listed me as the patient. The other 11 were authorized representative signatures on procedures billed to my insurance for a woman who, the records showed, had indeed been to Cedarbrook. My mother had gone, had the work done, and had billed it to me by signing me onto the claim as the person who authorized her care. She had made herself my patient and me her authorizer, a circle of fraud so neat it could only have been drawn by someone who believed the system was a story and the story was hers to tell. She was right about one thing: the system is a story. She was wrong about who writes the ending. The log writes the ending. The log had already written it. I just had to read it aloud. The $92,000 was not the point. The $92,000 was 16 different stories. 11 were the routine ones: the lumbar epidural, 2 knee injections, a nerve block, a sleep study pre-authorization, 4 follow-up visits billed to a primary that was on paper in another city. Each of those 11 had a representative line and a name that was almost mine. 3 were the ones that listed me as the responsible party, and each of those was a more expensive procedure: a scheduled MRI, an outpatient surgery, a physical therapy block of 20 sessions. The cost of those 3 alone was $38,000, and each carried my name in a different box: authorized representative, financial guarantor, and, on the MRI, emergency contact. I was her emergency contact for her own body. I had been, since the day I became a nurse, the person she called when she did not feel well, the person she asked to drive her, the person she asked to sit with her in the waiting room. I had been her emergency contact because she had no one else. And the love that earned me that title was the love she now used to put my name in the box that pays the bill. The 2 patient-listed forms were a $14,000 procedure and a $9,000 procedure, and they listed my date of birth, my insurance ID, and a phone number that she had. I checked, gotten from my phone bill, which she had somehow obtained, which I did not ask about because some trails you stop following when the trail starts to look back at you. The trap was elegant. The log was cleaner. The log did not need her to be clever. It only needed her to upload. The point was the trap underneath it. On the 3 responsible party forms, my mother had written my name where the system would look first when the bill went unpaid. She had built a funnel that ended at me, a daughter who, if she ever loved her mother enough to just sign, would have inherited not a reconciliation but a debt. The 2 forms that named me as the patient were the clearest of all. In them, I was the one who had the procedure, which meant I was the one who had authorized my own treatment, which meant any question about the claim would come to me, the forged author, for answers I could not give. She had written me into the center of the fraud so completely that the only escape was the one thing she could not provide: a real signature. The trap was elegant. The log was cleaner. The log did not need her to be clever. It only needed her to upload 16 forms, 11 months. 1 IP, a 2:14 a.m. signature pattern that matched the exact hour she sent me the thinking of you text. The same hand that forged the signature sent the lure. The same hour that authored the lie, authored the love. The total billed across those 16 forms was $92,000. Not all of it paid. Insurance denied some, paid $61,300 of it, and the rest sat in a pending dispute that was quietly becoming my problem, because the responsible party on 3 of the forms was listed as me. My mother had not only forged my name as authorized representative, on 3 of them she had listed me as the patient's responsible party, and on 2 as the patient herself, a $92,000 fiction in which I was the author, the payer, and the procedure, all at once. That is the trick of a forger who does not understand the system. She made me everywhere so she would not have to be anywhere. I did not call her. I did not confront her. I did not post about it. The calmest thing in an emergency is the person who documents, and I had 11 years of documentation instinct. I printed the audit log. I exported the badge records from Mercy General's system. A nurse can pull her own access history, and I pulled 3 years of it, a clean line proving I was at work on every forged date. I compiled the 16 forms side by side with the real signatures on my license, my tax returns, my bank paperwork, the genuine Dana Pierce hand, which is left slanted and dots its eyes high, nothing like the right slanted, timid mark on those forms that was clearly an adult copying a name she had seen on a birthday card and guessing at the rest. Then I did the thing my mother never expected, because she believed the story she told about me, that I was soft, that I was tired, that I would rather sign than fight. I filed. I filed 3 things, in this order, because order is a kind of revenge. First, a report to the insurer's Special Investigations Unit, with the audit log attached, flagged potential identity theft by authorized representative. SIUs move slow and sure, and they do not care about mothers. They care about $61,300. Second, a complaint with the State Attorney General's Medicaid and Private Insurance Fraud Division, with the badge logs proving I was physically at work when the signatures were made. Third, and this one matters most to me as a nurse, a self-report to my State Board of Nursing, because if my name is on a forged medical authorization, I report it before someone else does, and I report it clean. A nurse who hides a compromised credential loses it. A nurse who reports it keeps it. The board wrote back in 11 days, no action against me, case referred for investigation of the third party. The third party was my mother. The filings went out over 9 days in the order I gave you, and I kept a log of the log. A nurse audits the audit. The SIU acknowledged in 4 days with a case number I still have. The Attorney General's office acknowledged in 6. The board wrote in 11. Exporting 3 years of badge logs took one evening and a hospital login. I pulled every shift, every clock in, every clock out, a clean line of proof that I was at Mercy General on all 16 dates my mother had been at her kitchen table. The file was 400 pages long. I printed it and felt, for the first time in the whole ordeal, something like peace, not because the printing ended it, but because the printing was the opposite of everything my mother had ever done. She edited, I appended, she hid, I exported, she performed a truth she had not lived. I filed a truth I had lived, and the file was too long to be a story and too plain to be argued with. A 400-page alibi is the only kind of love letter a nurse writes to herself, and it says only one thing repeated. I was at work. None of them called my mother. None of them asked her side. The first call I made after I filed, I made to Daniel. He picked up on the first ring, which is how you know a lawyer has been waiting. He said, "Tell me one thing you did not do." I said, "I did not call her." He said, "Good, do not call her. She will call you. When she calls you, say this: Mom, I have filed what I filed, and the systems will do what the systems do. I love you. I will not discuss this on the phone. Then you hang up. You say it the same way every time. Do not improvise. Improvisation is how she gets in. I wrote the sentence on a card and taped it above my kitchen sink, the way a surgeon tapes a checklist above the OR table. I read it the first time she called. I read it the second. By the third call, I did not need the card, but I read it anyway because ritual is a kind of paper, and paper is what I had decided to live inside. The second call I made was to the SIU investigator. Her name was Patrice Vega, and she had the patient voice of a woman who has heard every lie and stopped being entertained by it. She asked me to walk her through the timeline. I did. She asked me to confirm the IP. I did. She asked, "Did you confront the third party?" I said, "Number." She said, "Good." She said, "Confrontation contaminates the record. The record is what we use." I loved her for that sentence. The record is what we use. I had been saying it for 11 years in a hospital. Now I was saying it to a fraud investigator, and the word meant the same thing. The third call was to the state attorney general's office, which routed me to a deputy named Ortega, who took a statement over the phone and emailed a confirmation number that I printed and taped next to Daniel's card. Ortega said, "This will move slowly, do not expect quick." I said, "I am a nurse, quick is for crashing. This is not crashing." Ortega laughed the way state lawyers laugh, once dry and from the ribs. The fourth call I did not make. I did not call my mother. I did not call Caleb. I did not call my father because my father is dead. I did not call my aunts because Barbara already knew and the others had learned that knowing Eleanor Pierce was its own full-time job. I sat in my kitchen and looked at the two cards, the lawyer's sentence and the AG's confirmation, and I felt, for the first time, the specific kind of alone that is not loneliness. It is the alone of a person who has stopped waiting for the family to behave. It is the alone of an audit that has been opened and will not be closed by sentiment. I drank the tea was cold. I poured a new cup, the audit was filed. That is the part she would have found unbearable, not the accusation, but the irrelevance. The systems did not want her story. They wanted the paper, and the paper for once was not hers. She found out the way people like her always do, through a freeze. Her card declined at the grocery store, a letter in a windowless envelope, a call from the surgical center asking why the responsible party claim had been voided. She called me then, the first real call in 3 years, not a voicemail, not a 2 a.m. text. A call at 6:12 p.m., which is the hour she calls when she is afraid and cannot pretend it is love. "Dana, something's wrong with my accounts. They're saying I forged. Did you do something?" She said, "Did you do something?" The way she used to say, "Did you eat?" As if I were the agent of every event in her life. I said the only true thing I could. I pulled the record, Mom. The record says I was at work. Then I hung up. The way you end a code that has already been called, quietly, because the patient is gone and the chart is full. She called again, and again. The calls now go to the number that rings and rings. I do not owe her a scene. I went back to work the next morning. I drove the same route. I parked in the same spot. I clocked in at the same terminal, and the badge beeped, and the screen said my name the way a screen says a name. It does not know is being read by a person who has just audited her own mother out of her life. I clocked in, I took report, I took vitals, I started an IV on a man in his 60s who had cut his hand on a broken bottle and was crying more than the wound required, and I held his hand the way I had held my mother's when I was a child, and she performed tenderness, gently, briefly, with one clean motion, and then I let go. The patient asked, "Are you okay, Hannah?" I said, "Yes, sir. The line is in. The doctor is on the way." He said, "You don't look okay." I said, "It's been a long week." He said, "I hear you, sister." He did not know my week. He did not know the envelope or the forms or the smiley face drawn in blue ink. He knew only that a nurse had held his hand and looked tired, and he offered me the only currency he had, a sentence that included the word sister. I took the sentence. I went to the next bed. Mona found me at the Pyxis, replacing the choti I had cleaned out. She stood next to me, did not look at me, and said, "You went." I said, "I went." She said, "Did it work?" I said, "It worked." She said, "Good." She took a narcotic count key out of her pocket and handed it to me. "You're on the count tonight, don't mess up the count. The count is the only thing we do that doesn't lie." I took the key. I counted. I did not mess up. The count, like the chart, did not lie. The count kept its mouth shut. The count was a kind of love, the way the chart is a kind of mother, and I have decided, in the years since, that the count is the closest thing to family I will ever let inside the door. Caleb called that week. He said, "Mom says you're in trouble," I said. "I am not in trouble, Caleb. Mom is in trouble. She put my name on forms that were not hers to put it on." He said, "She says you hurt her." I said, "She hurt me. She has been hurting me." The forms were the part I could prove. He was quiet for 11 seconds. I counted them. He said, "I don't know what to do." I said, "You don't have to do anything. You just have to read the next form she hands you." He said, "Okay." We hung up. I do not know if he read the next form. I know that he has not called me since to say he signed one. That is, for now, the kindest arrangement two siblings can make with a mother who taught them both what a pen is for. The scene was the signature she could not get, and the signature was the only thing she ever needed from me, and the only thing I would not give. The chart remembers what she forgot: that a daughter is not a form you fill in when the story needs a signature. I never told her any of this directly. That is the part she would not understand, that the quietest move was the one that ended her. She found out the way people like her always find out, through a system, not a scene, a letter from the insurer, a knock, a frozen account. The daughter she thought would sign became the signature that convicted her, and the conviction was a PDF. The dinner in the end was the last time she tried. The envelope sat on my table for a week, unopened, while the filings moved. When I finally opened it, after the SIU confirmed they were acting, I read all of it. 16 forms, each a small theft dressed as a kindness, each ending in a line where someone had tried to write Dana Pierce and gotten it almost right. The last one, the one she slid across the table, was blank, but for the heading and the signature line. She had not even filled it in yet. She just needed the name. The name was the whole crime. The name was the one thing she could not get without me, and the one thing I would not give. There is a line nurses use when a record has been altered. The chart will tell the truth if you let it. My mother spent her life editing the family story and expecting the family to forget. I spent 11 years learning that the only story that survives an audit is the one you did not edit. She edited. I audited. The audit won, the way it always does, because editing is a feeling and auditing is a fact. You might want a scene here where I scream at her, where I throw the envelope, where she cries and I finally feel something. There is no such scene. And the absence is the point. The most powerful thing I did to my mother was sign nothing and tell no one until the log had already spoken. She spent 3 years building a story in which I was the grateful signing daughter. The chart spent 3 years quietly recording that I was at work. When the two met, the story lost. It always loses. Let me give you the ending, the way a nurse gives a discharge, clear, with the instructions, and no drama you did not earn. My mother was investigated. The $61,300 the insurer had paid was clawed back from the provider, who had billed in good faith off a forged signature and was himself tangled in it. The responsible party claims listing me were voided. The 2 forms that named me as the patient were the cleanest evidence of all, because I have a Mercy General employment physical on file proving I was, among other things, not a candidate for the procedure billed in my name. The state referred the matter. My mother's name is now in a database she cannot edit. The surgical center, Cedarbrook, was itself a casualty. They had billed in good faith off a form that looked signed, and when the SIU flagged the pattern, they clawed back $61,300 and launched their own internal review of every claim with my mother's IP as the upload source. A coding clerk there, it turned out, had waved the representative signatures through for family convenience, a small mercy that became a large liability. The clerk was disciplined. The center settled. My mother, at the center of it, was not a victim of the system. She was the input. The system for once computed correctly, and the output was her name in a fraud database she will never edit, the way she edited every story before. The daughter she cast as the signer became the signature that ended the play. She calls sometimes. The calls go to a number that rings and, like the silence she taught me, does not answer. Caleb sent a card. It said the usual things. I read it and thought of the brother who learned to sign without reading, and I wondered which of those 16 forms he had been asked to sign first. I did not ask. Some audits you run on paper, some you run on people, and the people one you leave closed. I kept the statements, I kept the audit log, I kept the envelope, emptied, as a kind of specimen, the chart of a lie, preserved. In the emergency room, we keep specimens until they are read, and then we file them. This one has been read. This one is filed. I keep one thing on my nightstand that is not a chart, a small glass vial from the hospital, empty, the kind we send specimens in. Inside it is the emptied envelope, folded. It is not morbid, it is a specimen, preserved, read, filed. Sometimes at 3 a.m., between a discharge and the next ambulance, I look at it the way a gardener looks at a plant that did not die, not with triumph, but with the quiet relief of having caught it in time. The garden my mother tried to plant in my name did not take root because the soil was a lie and the log was the rain that washed it away. I have a real garden now, at the apartment I can finally afford, because the loan that was not mine is closed, and the shift I worked to close it is over. The plants are small, they are mine. They do not require a signature. A year passed, the garden grew. The tomato plant, which I had not expected to fruited. I do not know why I am telling you this, except that the tomato plant is the part of the story no one ever asks about, and it is the part that made me believe I was allowed to want a thing that did not require a signature. I learned to cook for myself, not perform cooking the way my mother performed it for company, but cook the way an ER nurse cooks after a shift, standing up, fast, with whatever is in the refrigerator, with the door open and the music on. I burned the rice twice. I undersalted the eggs 3 times. I made, once, a lentil soup that tasted so much like the kitchen of my childhood, the kitchen of burned popcorn and white diamond, that I sat down on the floor and cried, which is the only time I cried about her, and the tears were not for her, they were for the kitchen, and the kitchen is gone, and I do not go back. The soup is gone too. I do not make it again. Some specimens you do not keep in jars. Some you wash out of the pot and let go. I went, one Saturday in May, to a botanical garden, 2 towns over. I went alone. I bought the ticket with my own money. I walked the long path past the heirloom roses, and I did not narrate them. I did not caption them. I did not post them. I looked at them the way a nurse looks at a clean chart. Once, fully, and with the satisfaction of a thing that has nothing missing from it. The roses were missing nothing. The garden was missing nothing. I was missing nothing in that hour that I had not myself chosen to put down. I had a coffee on the way home at a place I had never been to. The barista asked, "Name for the order," and I gave her my name. She wrote it on the cup. She handed me the cup. The cup said, in her handwriting, in a hand that was not mine and not quite anyone else's, Dana Pierce. I held the cup the way you hold a chart you have just signed, carefully, briefly, with the awareness that the next person to read it will know exactly who was here. I drank the coffee. I drove home. The cup went into the recycling, not into a jar. Some specimens do not need to be preserved. Some just need to be held once and let go. That is the year after. That is the garden. That is the cup with my name on it. Written by a stranger in a hand that was trying to be legible and mostly was. The garden is still small. The tomatoes are coming in. I have not heard from my mother in 4 months. The calls have slowed. The database she is in does not update her calendar. The forms she used to keep me are the forms that ended her. The chart remembered. The chart always remembers. I am, in this small and quiet year, learning to be a person whose name only she gets to write, on forms she chooses, in a hand that is hers, and the hand rests. If this story reminded you of something in your own family, say it in the comments. I read them. And if you are the daughter who always signed to keep the peace, open the record. The record is the only mother who never lies about what you did. What I want you to take from this is not revenge. It is the quieter thing underneath it. A signature is a fact, and a fact has a log, and a log does not love anyone enough to lie for them. My mother loved me the way she loved her stories, as material. I learned to love myself the way a nurse loves a chart, as the truth that survives the telling. If this story reminded you of something in your own family, say it in the comments. I read them. And if you are the daughter who always signed to keep the peace, open the record. The record is the only mother who never lies about what you did. Subscribe if you want the next one. There is a bell, use it. And before you go, check the description for the next story, the one about the brother who forged the will, and tell me in the comments which side of your family keeps the paper.